Halito, and welcome to Native Chalk Talk, a podcast by natives for all. Here we're keeping our Native ancestors' stories and history alive, while also sharing with you our Native culture, traditions, and more. I'm Rachel Youngman, a Choctaw originally from Anadarko, Oklahoma. I hope you'll enjoy this journey with me as we learn from our Native American guests. And I hope you'll do me a favor. Feel free to like and share these episodes. I so appreciate it. Yakoki.
I am more than a craftsman.
I am more than a firefighter.
More than a teacher.
Than a student.
A business owner.
Than a leader.
A healer.
I am more than a champion.
Chatta ilfinachili.
Chata elefanachili.
I am Choctaw proud.
I am Choctaw proud.
I am Choctaw proud.
We are the Choctaw Nation, and together we're more.
They called her Savage, but she was unconquerable. Savage, the musical, is a dramatic musical inspired by the life of 1920s Chickasaw sharpshooter and silent film actress Wanda Savage. It's a powerful story of survival, the universal desire to be accepted, and a quest for redemption. Wanda was an independent, widowed, biracial mother trying to raise her child and have a career in a time when women were just starting to have a voice, but Native women were still not heard. She struggled to fit in the two very different worlds in which she was raised, both in the tribe and in the outside world. In the process of making a name for herself, Wanda faced oppression, racism, sexism, whitewashing, and abuse. While vaudeville exploited her Native identity, Hollywood tried to erase it. Wanda refused to embrace the stereotype of Native American women. Her story and her struggles are as relevant now as they were when she experienced them 100 years ago, holding up a mirror to our society to see how far we have come or not. You're probably wondering, like I was, who in the world is this person behind bringing this story to life and preserving it by putting it to music? Well, I'll tell you. Nicolette Blount is a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation and is an award-winning producer, director, composer, singer, vocal coach, actress, songwriter, and is a member of the Dramatist Guild, Songwriters of America, ASCAP, Maestro Society of Composers and Lyricists, Rise, and Muse. Anne Savage is based on Nicolette's Chickasaw great-grandmother, Wanda Savage, who we'll learn more about in this episode. Born and raised in Southern California, Nicolette grew up influenced by many different tribes as her mom taught at Sherman Indian School. Nicolette is co-owner and producer at Take My Shot Productions and owns Underground Demos, a subsidiary of Take My Shot Productions. And she is the proud founder of NativeTheaterArtists.com, in which Indigenous Americans and Canada First Nation creatives, actors, writers, producers, and more are given more visibility for future opportunities for Broadway and off-Broadway. Many are singing the praises of Nicolette's creation of Savage, such as Broadway producer Joanne Dean, who states, a haunting yet buoyant, jazzy score of loss and redemption. Like the Trail of Tears, its truth echoes still today. The smart and savvy lyrics transcends time, Broadway bound. And Rachel Klein, director and choreographer, writes, Wanda Savage fascinates people, a strong-willed woman who unapologetically broke the norms of traditional gender stereotypes. There is undeniably mass appeal for this story. This is the time for Wanda's story to be on stage. Having a musical background myself, I was thrilled to get to know Nicolette more. She lives in Massachusetts with her amazing husband and 3 daughters, and she's featured in Native Max magazine, DC Metro Arts, the Chickasaw Times, publications, and podcasts. So without further ado, let's meet this talented singer and composer. Nicolette, welcome to Native Chalk Talk.
Chukma Halito.
Halito. So you are making big waves in the musical and Native communities. Savage was nominated for and is a current 2024 semifinalist for the prestigious O'Neill National Musical Theater Conference residency, which means it's in the top 15, y'all. And Savage was nominated for 11 Broadway World Boston Regional Award and won first runner-up for Best Musical. And you won third runner-up for Best Direction of a Musical. Anyway, this has to be super exciting for you.
It's super exciting. It's also very weird to hear you say all these things. I'm just like,
Well,
wow,
that's not even
really?
all of it. I
I
didn't
mean,
even put everything in there. That's the crazy part. You've done
I feel like I'm
lots.
not worthy. Yeah, it's just the whole thing's crazy and exciting, and I'm humbled and I'm honored, and um yeah.
You absolutely are worthy. I know that you have worked so hard. Tell us, Nicolette, what tribes are you from?
I'm Chickasaw, and I'm registered, whatever that means. I mean, we know there's a lot of different opinions on that. And I am from the Raccoon Clan in the Chickasaw Nation, and I have some Seminole ancestry.
You know, your mom taught at Sherman Indian School. Did you go to school there, or were you at the school some growing up? Because it sounds like that time did make an impact on your life.
I remember going to powwows and things like that at my mom's school. My mom had a lot of friends who were from the Hopi tribe. And in fact, when my mom passed away, her really close friends from the Hopi tribe did a prayer and brought blankets to put
Aw.
over the casket that they gave to the grandkids. And so I would say that, like, the Hopi Nation, actually, people from the Hopi Nation influenced me a lot growing up.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I relate to you on this because my dad was the art teacher at Riverside Indian School, which was an off-reservation boarding school. The oldest still left standing today, actually, in Anadarko, where I grew up. And so I grew up a lot more around Kiowa, Comanche, Apache, and so on, more than I grew up around Choctaws. When you and I first spoke, you stated that this is a show about a woman who faced misogyny and racism and who happens to be Native. I thought that was interesting. Tell us more about your great grandmother, Wanda Savage. Was that her real last name?
No, her real
I
name.
assume not.
Yeah, no, her real name was Maddie Owanda Hardwick. And Maddie with a T, with two T's. Because she was both part Chickasaw and part white, um, she, I think, passed a lot for being white. And I think that her story is mostly women's issues, right? Because I feel like those things, misogyny and things like that, a lot of women deal with. The racism thing, a lot of people deal with that who aren't just Native, right? And also people who are both, you know, whether it's Black and white or Asian and white or Indigenous and white, you know, there's a lot of people can deal with that kind of thing and not feeling like they fit in. So I say it's mostly about a woman who happens to be Native because I think people assume that it's a Native musical and there's going to be fancy dancing and we're going to talk about,
Right.
you know, all these Native things, which we do deal with, but it's mostly the story of this woman who was Native and had issues dealing with that, but also going into the entertainment business and the casting couch and all of these things that, you know, females have faced, especially in the 1920s. Women were
Oh,
just starting to have a voice, and Native women, you know, while all women were getting the vote, Native women weren't. I'm not honestly 100% sure why and how she chose her name. A lot of the show, in the show, we have presented a possibility of how that happened.
mhm.
Um, and so that is in the show, and it's part of, like, someone is throwing a slur at her, and then she's like, "Oh yeah, you think I'm a savage? Screw you. I'm taking this name, so you can't use it to put me down anymore."
I
And
love
so
that.
that's kind of what we've done in the show. Why she officially changed her name to that, it's kind of a mystery. And
Mm.
also, like, every person she worked with. So, like, one husband, his name was Howard Hard, and then it was Wanda and Howard Savage. And then, you know, it's interesting. Then
How
she had,
funny.
yeah, then she had like a girl partner, and then it was Wanda and Esther Savage. So it's interesting.
In a moment, we'll talk about Savage the musical, but first, let's learn about this legendary performer and pay her our respects. What do you want us to know about Wanda?
The saying is she was your best friend, but she had a temper. And I think that she was a trailblazer. I think she was an early feminist. For me, being a performer myself, I didn't know anybody else in my family who performed except for her. So that's why I've always been drawn to her. She also was just this badass, like, she didn't put up with crap. She was wearing pants when women were getting put in jail for wearing pants. Always wore pants. It's interesting because when you look at pictures of her, like this is a picture of her right here.
Love
She
it.
wore pants all the time. It seemed like once she got to Hollywood, she started wearing dresses, which is part of the story we've constructed in the musical. She came from an alcoholic father, and her mom left her at a young age. And we've dealt with that a little bit different in the show with creative license. But in such short time, she did so many amazing things in her career. You know, she started her career probably in her 20s, mid early 20s, and then she passes away in her 40s of cancer, you know, and then she had
Young.
this short period of life of this crazy life, and then she was gone, you know, and she kind of has this legacy. And I think on the surface, if you think about her story, you're like, wow, like, you know, she did all these things, but then she was very flawed. So there were things that probably, you know, maybe the Chickasaw Nation isn't too proud of putting out there, in terms of like, she had this huge career and then she ended up in a brothel. But the thing that I see about Wanda is that she made mistakes. She made big mistakes, which all of us do, but there was
Sure.
redemption in the end. She had redemption. She tried to make things right in the end. And she was probably one of the first women that I know of that was Native. And although they were representing her as white, and she went to Hollywood, she became this white actress. Although they were representing her as white, she was probably one of the first Native women to, you know, be in film and not just represented as a, you know, stereotypical Native American person, which is fine. But usually those people in silent films weren't listed.
Yeah.
They weren't even credited, like nothing. And they,
Wow.
you know, and then you had people who pretended to be Native and all this stuff.
With the worst wigs ever and
Yes.
orange makeup. So
Yes.
bad.
So, I mean, I feel like she did a lot of things that we should be proud of. And we're just amazing in a time where women
Yeah.
didn't have very many choices. And did she have a lot of husbands? Yes. But also, and I found this out from talking to people who aren't even Native or other cultures, and they're telling me about their mom or their grandmother. Back in the day, women would get married because that's where they would get their status and their money. And then if that person ended up being a loser, or maybe they wanted to be, you know, make more money, be in a family that had more money, then they would divorce that person and marry up. And she kind of did the same thing, because what other choices did we have? She was also this entrepreneur, and she had her own letterhead stationery. She was called the Shooting Stars. And I know she was a stunt woman. And sadly, a lot of those silent films were burned. They were
No.
burned, they were
That's what I
thrown
was going to
away.
ask you. Where are the
Yeah.
films? I want to
No,
see.
they didn't think that they were
Oh.
important when they first started doing silent films. They didn't think they were important. They also, there were fires on studios and things like that happen. And my cousin might have something, but it's still unknown if that's her or not, because like it looks like her, but like unless you were a huge name, you weren't listed, especially if you're female. If you were Clara Bow and you were the star, then yes. But like my family later met like Jack Hoxsey, who is a huge Western star that she worked with, and he totally remembered her. Like, this is a long time ago, but like, so we have proof that she did do that.
Y'all, I have to show you my new favorite soap from Baker's Bar Soapery. Check out this Yunish, which means buffalo in Choctaw. It's scented with leather fragrance, so I bought one for my husband and one for me too, of course, and it smells so good. This soap is a tribute to the Choctaw and the resilience of the buffalo. Luxury soaps, lotions, and lip balms from Baker's Bar Soapery are 100% Choctaw crafted. And yes, these are made with goat's milk, so they leave your skin feeling soft and supple. So load up on these Choctaw soaps made by Tiffany at Baker's Bar Soapery at thebbsoapery.com. But be sure to get 20% off when you use the code NATIVECHOCTAW, that's all caps, when you spend $25 or more. Treat yourself to the luxury your skin deserves with Baker's Bar Soapery.
Back to the brothel thing. So it was a dancing saloon.
Okay, it was a dancing saloon. Okay. Step up.
Sense of dance, but also things might have happened, whether she did that or not, I don't know. The interesting thing is I feel like she went from Hollywood to that. And my family always says, oh, well, she needed money. And so you started working at this dancing saloon. And I'm thinking to myself, I bet she pissed someone off. There is no way that you go from working with Hollywood people to a
Right.
dancing saloon. How does this happen? And we know
Yeah.
that she has a bad temper. So like in our show, we have constructed kind of like this Harvey Weinstein character who tries to attack her basically. And she's like, So I think that she probably pissed someone off, and it was getting close to, if not the depression. So
True.
it was harder to turn a buck and things like that. But yeah,
Wow.
her last husband found her in this dancing saloon.
I feel for her so much, but I love that she had tenacity. They may have even seen her as difficult.
Yeah.
We all know a lot of women who are termed difficult when really they're just standing up for themselves or what's right or just being smart. And it's not always acceptable.
We tried to portray that in the musical. There's a short scene where the director in Hollywood is like trying to tell them, okay, you're going to go through the door, and it's like they're filming a scene, and then you're going to do this with your gun. And Wanda's like, if I shoot him with a rifle, you're going to blow him through the door. I would never shoot him with a rifle at this close a range. And then the director gets really mad at her because she's being argumentative with him. But I feel like that is something she would do,
Oh, totally. Yes. And she was a sharpshooter, so she also would know.
There's a story that my uncle tells, that when he was younger, this is much later after Hollywood, and she's living in the middle of Wyoming, and a neighbor comes by and says, Wanda, I think something's wrong with this gun. And she goes, okay, let me see. So she takes a playing card and puts it in the fence, but she doesn't put it in the fence like this way. She puts it this way. And she puts it in the crook of the fence. And so the saying goes that she didn't aim, she just shot. And so she shot, and sure enough, she goes, yep, going to a little bit to the left. And then she quickly adjusted her aim and shot right through that little tiny sliver of paper that wasn't even this way. It was this way, and got it. Once she figured out which way it was shooting, she adjusted and she got it. And she told him, yep, it's a little off.
I love me some Wanda. That's amazing. Yeah,
and then
that
also,
is something to aspire to.
Also, she she made her own costumes. And then when she ended up in Wyoming, she would make outfits for her daughters, and which is another thing that I relate to because I went to fashion design school.
When did you really start understanding about Wanda and her life?
I grew up knowing about her. So my very first this is so weird. My very first birthday was at her ranch. And my family lived in California. So they took a little 1-year-old drove me all the way to Wyoming from Southern California. And then she was passed obviously by then, but my first birthday was there. And so my family has like this, because they have so many people coming and going at the ranch hands and stuff. So they kind of have like a, what do you call that when you sign in? Like a sign-in book, like
a guest book or something.
Yeah, guest book. And so it's really old and huge. And if you go back to 1973, August 21, there's my parents signed in on my birthday.
That is so cool.
And I didn't know that. I mean, maybe I knew it, but I don't think I consciously knew it until, my mom might have told me, but I can't remember. But I didn't really realize that until I went and visited out in the ranch with my kids around like 2018. And then I saw it and I was like, oh my gosh, like so many connections with her, even more than I thought. So yeah, so I grew up hearing about her. And then, from my grandpa, mostly from my grandpa, from my aunt, from my mom. And then my cousin came out with a documentary about her. And then recently my aunt wrote it's kind of like a family, historical, like history of our family. And she's in that too.
Now, as we mentioned earlier, this was the 1920s. So the women's rights movement had begun in 1848, and very painfully, slowly but surely, by June of 1919, Congress had passed the 19th Amendment, which was ratified on August 18th, 1920. And of course, the 19th Amendment meant that women are now able to vote. But as you had mentioned earlier, not all Native women were allowed to vote. So what a mess. Only 3 years later, in 1923, the Equal Rights Amendment was proposed to Congress, which would secure equality for women by ending distinctions of divorce, employment, property, and more between men and women. So this was a big change. And of course, these newfound rights stirred a lot of feelings in people. Most men opposed these equal rights and the right for women to vote, and even many women opposed the idea, which is baffling to me. Cartoons of suffragists being old, ugly shrews were presented in the papers, and both men and women argued that women were already represented by their husbands. They don't need to represent themselves. And the women's role was to be in the home and in local affairs. Many also argued that with women being so busy in the home, they wouldn't have time to keep up with politics, and therefore their votes would be uneducated. And speaking of uneducated, women lacked the mental capacity to produce any thoughtful expertise. So, Nicole, you have no capacity to produce any thoughtful expertise.
I guess not.
If you lived back then, anyway.
Yeah.
So, these events in history are really reflected in the idea of bursting, roaring 20s, women shortening their hair, wearing dresses that were mid length instead of to the floor. So scandalous. And the dances were becoming wilder and free. So women were breaking away from the chains that had been holding them back since the dawn of time. And what better representation of this freedom than the audacious performances of vaudeville? Now, vaudeville burst into the scene in the early 1900s, and usually there would be multiple acts throughout the show, such as dancing, comedy, music. They had animals, acrobats, magicians, burlesque. I mean, it had to have been a sight to see. I wish I could go back in time and see it. And I read somewhere that it really represented social progress of the day. Remember, we're coming out of the Victorian era, which started in 1837. So those who were big into strict disciplines and perfected social confines were probably appalled by the thought of vaudeville and the incoming roaring 20s. So the term vaudeville comes from a French word that basically means drinking songs, not to be confused with burlesque, which is a little more on the raunchy side. So it could include that, but it was, there were certain shows that would include burlesque and then some that were a little so-called cleaner. So vaudeville is fun, entertaining, light, and free, and it's all about having a good time. Wanda made her way into vaudeville. Do you know how she had landed that gig?
She was on her second husband at the time. Her first husband passed of cancer. So my grandfather and his sister's dad passed of cancer young. And then she was on to her second husband, who was a ne'er-do-well. And his mother wanted him to marry her because he knew that, or she knew that Wanda had native money. And they said, oh, well, the mom said, you're a loser. Go marry her. She's got native money.
Wow.
So she was with him, and it kind of seems like he might have been on the abusive side or controlling side. The story goes that she was either in the circus or vaudeville, and she raises her hand to volunteer to be part of the shooting competition. They were like, oh, whoever can shoot this spinning thing, whatever. And I'm not sure if she was going to win a rifle or if it was just to see if you could be better than their sharpshooter.
Right.
And so she raised her hand, and her husband's like, the ne'er-do-well is like, no, what are you doing? Try to pull her hand down. And then they saw her and called her up, and she blew them away. So like in our show, she basically goes up there and they're like, oh, you just have to hit one spinning plate on the spinning target. And she hits all of them, and she's not even aiming. So like, she's not even
So
looking
cool.
at it. She's like, that's
Right.
how it is in our show. But supposedly there was some shooting competition that she volunteered for, and they were just so like, wow.
I wonder if her husband even knew that she had that talent.
Probably not. I'm thinking probably not. So in our show, we've taken the license of showing her. So she grew up on the Chickasaw territory. And in our show, we've made it seem like it was something that she learned from her Chickasaw tribe, her mom, things like that. But in reality, that's the creative license we've taken because we wanted it to be a little bit more feminine focused.
Yeah.
But in reality, her dad was a lawman. So chances are that he was an alcoholic lawman. So chances are she might have learned it from him. It might have been a natural talent. I mean, she just picked it up and was good at it. And she knew it. And so whether that husband knew or not, he probably didn't. By this time, she for sure had 2 children. She might have had her 3rd already. Now, I will say in the musical, we didn't want this to be native Sound of Music. So we took out all the kids and we just focused on my grandpa because also like, I don't want to upset anybody else. You know, I don't know. I mean, I know my great uncle who's from her last marriage. I know him and his family, but everyone else I don't really know. Although people are coming out of the woodwork, like contacting me and like, hey, I'm related to Wanda Savage. I'm like, really? And so cousin of mine recently in Oklahoma who works for the Chickasaw Nation. It's amazing. Yeah, Ashley. Hey, shout out to Ashley. So by this point, I'm thinking like she has 2, if not her 3rd child, because she had a child with this ne'er-do-well guy. So she was either on her 3rd, she already had 3 or at least 2. And I'm thinking she was just restless. She's getting maybe, you know, it's a new era. It's a new time. There's the new woman that's around. There's like women are starting to have a voice. I think that she was like, hey, this is an opportunity for me to win a gun or whatever the prize was or, you know, and plus I think as a mom, I understand that. Like you raise your kids. I stayed home and raised my kids. And, you know, sometimes you get being a mom is amazing. It is the most amazing thing that you can do. But sometimes you get a little restless and you're like, you know, I want something for me. It's like everything, and not to be selfish, but you just like, it's like you lose a piece of yourself a little bit, especially if you're staying home, taking care of your children. You know, this is kind of what we hope to show the musical. But that's how she got to vaudeville.
I love that story. And then once she got there, you had mentioned to me that vaudeville exploited her nativeness. What do you know about her time in vaudeville and then how her ethnicity was exploited? I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory with the name Wanda Savage.
Yeah, so these are things that we have taken some creative license with in the musical. This is based on pictures that I have of her. Even the picture behind me, her face is much lighter than her hands. Did they put on more makeup for her because it's a black and white photo? I don't know. Did they want her to look more white? I don't know. But in the musical, we felt that if we, you know, because if we look at pictures of her when she was in vaudeville, she was more dressed Western and more native-ish and things like that. And then, so we took that to the extreme for the musical because historically that did happen. So in our musical, we're writing the line between truth, what historically happened to a lot of people and wanting to represent that, what actually happened, and then creative license. So, you know, it's a little bit different, but definitely when she got to Hollywood, all of a sudden she's blonde and she's really white. And so something happened with all of that. I mean, it's kind of evident by the pictures, whether, you know, they made her more Western because that was native feeling, and then she got to Hollywood and she's just looked white. She didn't
they completely reworked her image. For you listeners, if anyone's wanting to hop on over to YouTube, I do also, every episode is also on video, and I'll be placing some photos along this episode so that you can see what we're talking about here.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this series.
Thanks for listening to Native Chalk Talk. Be sure to join our community on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and check us out at nativechalktalk.com. Stay tuned for the next episode. You're going to love it. Yakoki. Thank you, my friends.